Hi, it's Penny here. Welcome to another reading vlog. So in this reading vlog, we are at the start of April, which means we can get into the Orilium Magical Readathon by G at Book Roast. The official name is the Spring Equinox Readathon. You won't really hear me talking about it as that because it's autumn here in New Zealand and I just get way too confused. So the Orilium Readathon is starting in April and I'm going to be reading books for that. Firstly, I have the demonology prompt, and for that I'm going to be reading A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. So the prompt for this was to read a book that you didn't pay for, and this is a library book, so I didn't pay for it. This is also the first book in the last trilogy in the First Law world, so there's like 10 books, maybe 11 now, but about 10 books in the First Law world. Really love the first trilogy. The in-between standalone books I didn't love as much. This one, I'm really hoping to love it. I'm hoping that everything that's been set up in the books before will come together in a really satisfying way, but is that really how Joe Abercrombie writes books? Not really, so maybe I'm delusional. And I don't really know exactly what this trilogy is going to focus on. The series in general is about these different conflicts going on in this world where there's all these different empires battling against each other. It's kind of an underlying magical conflict going on between some very powerful magicians. We'll call them magicians. I think they're mostly called magi in this. Anyway, I've been excited to pick this up for a while, so I'm glad that I'm finally getting to it. The other thing I am also going to be reading is for animal studies, where you needed to read a book with a yellow title. I'm going to be reading Shaman's Crossing by Robin Hobb. So this is the first book in the Soldier Sun trilogy, so a new trilogy for me. This is a new trilogy for me, even if it's not a new world. As for Robin Hobb, I have read all of the Realm of the Elderlings. Most of it is behind me. You can't easily see it. So I thought it's time to try and pick up some Robin Hobb that's not Realm of the Elderlings. I have heard mixed things about the Soldier Sun trilogy, but so far, I started it this morning on my run, and it says I'm 16% of the way through. And so far, like, it's feeling very similar. We've got this young boy who is being raised to be a soldier because he's the second son who was always, like, traditionally raised to be a soldier. And it feels very similar to the beginning of the Realm of the Elderlings, where we've got kind of Fitz as a young boy trying to find his place in the world and figure out what's right and what's wrong. Same with this. It kind of feels like it's set in like a Western type time, but it doesn't have a Western feel. It's more just there is this kind of civilization that's obviously been colonizing different areas, conquering them, because it talks about the conquered people. So they've got like cavalry and troops and armies. And there's also the plains people who seem to be very similar to like Native Americans. And I'm not really sure how well this series is going to deal with kind of the conflict between those two different groups of people. There is also another group of people that live in the forests or something and can't really go in the sun. And it seems like maybe they're a bit of a magical threat. So as I said, so far we're mostly getting this young boy learning about the world. And then just where I've gotten up to, he's basically been spending some time being trained by one of these plains people. And in some ways it's quite brutal. So again, similar to kind of the experience that Fitz has in the Realm of the Elderlings. As well, actually, I'm just remembering, there is, just before that kind of happened, there was one adult in this world who had quite a long racist rant, and that was pretty awful to listen to. So I guess that's something to be aware of if you're going to go into this series. I'm still kind of holding out to see how it continues to deal with that theme. Mostly so far it's just the protagonist hearing different people's opinions, but he hasn't yet really formed his own. And I feel like it's framing it like he's going to be much more aligned with these plains people, but we'll see. The one other class I want to do some reading for the Orilium Readathon during this week is the law class. So for this one, basically you just need to read this little thing that G has written, one page. I think I should be able to do it. So both of the main books that I'll be reading during this vlog are ones that I have been anticipating reading for quite a while. So I'm excited about that. It's a great start to the Orilium Readathon. Let's hope that great start continues. So I have realized that A Little Hatred is actually blurbed on the front cover by Robin Hobb, which is coincidental since I'm reading Robin Hobb at the same time as I'm reading this book. And there is a little bit of a similarity in that both of these kind of have this like industrial revolution in the middle of happening. So in this one, some of it is set in this city, and you can see like factories are starting to crop up, and like weird things are happening out in the farmlands, and people are being taken advantage of a lot. Like there's a lot of that grittiness that Joe Abercrombie likes to do, but like showing kind of all the awfulness that happened as the industrial revolution started taking place, and factories and smog and all the awfulness started taking over the world. And I will say, I'm enjoying the way that Shaman's Crossing is addressing that better than I am with this one. This one, like, I've been excited to get to this final trilogy for a long time, but I'm 100 pages in now, and I'm just not really feeling it. I think the problem is Joe Abercrombie's strength is always his characters. Like, that was what really sucked me into the First Law trilogy, and then Best Served Cold. That's eventually what sucked me in, and I think what let it down with the other standalones. And so far, this is kind of letting it down in terms of that as well. We have been introduced to a bunch of characters. We've got this woman from the north who is the daughter of one of the Northmen that we know from the past that's kind of ended up in a leadership position. And she has like epilepsy and possibly visions of the future, but most of her chapters she's just kind of been on the run and like hiding in the bush and that kind of thing, because this other group of Northlanders has attacked them, and then now those people are kind of going to the Union for help. So the Union is where most of our other characters are. We have this young guy, the young lion he's referred to. Leo is his name. He is also the son of someone we know, and he's, I guess you could call him passionate and brave, but his mother kind of calls him stupid and over-emotional, and he really wants to be a hero. But honestly, I don't really care about him. He hasn't done anything interesting. Like, being a hero in a battle isn't a motivation that interests me. Then as well, in the city, we have Orso, who is the heir to the throne, and he's an alcoholic druggie who sleeps with a lot of prostitutes and is altogether useless. He's like, woe is me, I am so useless, and feels all bad about it, even though, like, obviously he's incredibly privileged, and so I don't care about him. It seems like he is going to try and be more useful, but knowing Joe Abercrombie, he's going to try and eventually realize that it was all a waste of time. So I'm not feeling that into that storyline. We also got some random chapters, maybe just one, from this farmer, and the Lord is like taking the farmland back and basically ruining his farm and saying, oh, well, you can go and work in the city where all the factories are. That's where the future is. I'm trying to think what other characters are. There's a couple of characters on the other side of the Northmen's War, like older characters that have been told to supervise the prince on that side. Oh, there's actually also this woman who is the daughter of another character from the first trilogy. I won't say who because it's spoilers, but I will say that going into this trilogy, I think a lot of people are like, is there going to be unknown incest, like incest where people don't know that it's incest? Joe Abercrombie doesn't muck around with making you ask that question. He answers it pretty quickly. So, yeah, I don't know, I just don't really like any of the characters, whereas with the first trilogy, I was invested in each character's individual struggles straight away, even though I couldn't really tell what the plot is. This, I don't really know what the plot is either. I suspect there's not going to be much of one, but we don't have much to do tomorrow, so maybe I'll try and get a bunch more through this and see if it can suck me in. I don't know what I'm going to do if it doesn't. The other thing I did is I went for a run and I was listening to Shaman's Crossing, and I think I'm now just past a third, 35% of the way through. So that one. I think I said last time he was spending some time with these plains people, and some kind of like magical, very traumatic events happened there, as you would expect from a Robin Hobb book, where she always does awful things to her characters. And it was really interesting learning about, it's kind of like these plains people have this magical bridge to the afterlife, potentially. I think that's what it's meant to be. But these other people from the forest who do all sorts of magic have like blocked access of these plains people to their afterlife. So he kind of gets connected to that somehow. But then after all the traumatic events, he kind of just goes back to his life as a soldier son. And it's quite a big change. So like the very beginning of my run, it was so intense. There was so much happening. And then the whole second half was just him like getting to know what his father thinks about him and going off to train in the city at the capital to be a soldier, which is all very much slower paced. So I mentioned this kind of has like industrial aspects as well. He kind of has now a bit of a connection to nature, and he lives more out in the plains in nature, but now he's going to the city, and on his way there he sees them just like burning down whole forests to like get rid of the bush so they can just harvest the logs and the timber, and that's really upsetting for him. And like that view of the impacts of industry, like the view of the impact on nature rather than the view that this offers, which is like the impact on people. I guess I care less about the impact on people and more about the impact on nature, although of course that also impacts people eventually. Anyway, I still don't really know where Shaman's Crossing is going, but I think I'm enjoying it in a similar way to the way that I enjoyed Realm of the Elderlings. I will say in the first Fitz books, we really have this like father-son relationship where Fitz has like several father figures, and those relationships really develop in a almost beautiful way. In this, his father figures are shit. So, not sure that's going to change.
Chasing one another, getting lost in another summer.
Okay, so update time. Last night I was reading A Little Hatred, most of yesterday actually, when we weren't at the beach, and I'm up to page 260. I was hoping to get to page 300, but we didn't quite make it. But I will say, like, I am feeling more engaged in the story. I think a lot of that though is that I really had to let go of the idea that this was going to be a character-based story, because I still don't really like most of the characters or what they're doing or really care about the way that's being told. What this mostly seems to actually be is a story about the Industrial Revolution. So just before where I got up to, there's kind of this big riot of the workers fighting back against all the injustices that were being done against them. And also, I guess you wouldn't go into this book without expecting some really horrible things, but there were some quite horrible things being done to children, which is the big motivation for a lot of characters, and was pretty awful to read. And at the big climax of this riot, there was one chapter where we kind of just jumped to lots of different perspectives of how they were experiencing this big riot. And that's when I decided I need to let go of being attached to any particular characters and just let Joe Abercrombie tell the story he wants to tell, I guess, even though I'm not sure that that's the story I want to read, because like, I know that Joe Abercrombie doesn't want to write your typical fantasy book, and this is not your typical fantasy book because it doesn't have much, if any, fantasy in it, and it could almost just be a historical fiction, you know, about the Industrial Revolution. It wouldn't take much to just be that. And if you know me, you know I don't really like historical fiction. Like, I know history and humans are terrible. I don't necessarily need to read about it, but I'm trying to like not turn myself against the book. I'm trying to like engage with it as it is, and like it's still really well written, and I do like kind of the things that are coming together, so I'll be interested to see where it's gonna go, I guess. Then as well, I went on a run this morning, and I'm now how far through Shaman's Crossing? 48%, so about halfway. I need to hurry up if I'm gonna finish this by the end of the week. So everything I listened to today was really different from everything I'd been listening to so far. Basically, he has now gone to this school for nobles who are going to be in the army, and it's really just this like army college setting now, and it's very disconnected from anything to do with the plains people or the Spix. Is that what they were called? There's like little mentions of them that make me think we're going to come around to it again, and I'm sure we will, but everything I listened to since I talked to you last has just been this school, and it's kind of the beginning of the school. They go through this heavy hazing type situation, and hazing type activities always seem quite immature to me, so it's not that enjoyable to read. Also, there's kind of this conflict between the older nobles and their soldier sons. So second sons in this world are always soldier sons who will train, and the soldier sons of the nobles, or the old nobles, are kind of in conflict with soldier sons of the new nobles. So the king kind of recently had put a whole bunch of soldier sons and like elevated them to be nobles of their own after some successful conquering of the plains people. But a lot of the older nobles don't really think that these second sons of second sons should be at the same level as them. And so it seems like the hazing is a lot heavier for these new noble soldier sons. So yeah, it's just a lot of young men doing terrible things to each other. It is kind of also about this camaraderie and this friend group that he's building, and I do enjoy part of that. I will say as well though, I've heard a lot of people talk about the second book having like some fat phobia or people not liking the way it dealt with that issue. But I've never really heard it mentioned in regards to the first book. So it is worth noting that one of these boys is fat, large, and really struggling with some of what's going on in this soldiering school. And throughout the hazing process especially, he's getting a lot of mistreatment because of that. So it's not exactly enjoyable to read. It's probably very realistic though. I don't think it's necessarily being treated badly, so it'd be interesting to see if it's that character in particular that's the one that people are complaining about with regards to the second book. I think as well, like our main character, for most of the time, he's just observing things and feeling things and like experiencing things. And I think this is similar with the Realm of the Elderlings. We don't often get any kind of like moral determinations by the main character. I feel like Robin Hobb just kind of puts it there and then it's up to you to decide what was right and what was wrong. I actually, while I'm comparing things to Realm of the Elderlings, when Fitz is learning this skill, there's also kind of some very traumatic schooling type experiences that he goes through. So you could definitely compare that to what's happening to our main character in Shaman's Crossing. Anyway, even though it's very slow paced, I'm definitely more engaged with Shaman's Crossing than I am A Little Hatred. Also, last night while I was not doing much of anything, I picked up the graphic novel for Locke and Key, the first volume, which actually meets my Orilium prompt for the artificery class, which is where you had to have a lock or a key on the cover. So I decided to reread the Locke and Key series. And actually last night when I picked it up, I was only going to read just a little bit of it. And then even though this is a reread for me, I kind of just wanted to know what was going to happen next. I know what's going to happen next, but I'd forgotten a lot of the details, and it's so tense that I couldn't put it down. So that was a great time. The Locke and Key series, if you haven't heard about it, basically we have this family, they go through a really traumatic experience, and for that reason they move to their father's family home, kind of in the middle of nowhere, this big fancy house called the Key House. And at this house there are these different magical keys that they start finding that do all sorts of strange and spooky things. The main one that you get in the first volume is the ghost key, I think it must be called, where basically if you use it to open a door, then when you walk through the door you will become a ghost until you come back through the door and go back into your body. I really love the way that that's used in the story, and I can't wait to like continue the series and get to see all the rest of the keys, and also it's kind of like this bigger mystery that's being set up. But it's also like really dark and really violent. I would say, like, I've watched the TV show and I did enjoy the TV show, but now reading the graphic novel again, I kind of think, I'm not sure they really captured all the darkness of it. So I'm really looking forward to rereading the series for sure. And maybe by the next time I talk to you, I might have read some more of that as well, even though I really should be reading this. Okay, so I did a bunch of reading last night and also went for a super long run this morning. So I've managed to get about 80% of the way through this, just over I think, and about 85% of the way through, this is representing my audiobook, through Shaman's Crossing. And actually now I'm feeling really engaged in both of them. I will say Shaman's Crossing, I think I'm more like satisfied with some of the things. So Anyway, let's talk about A Little Hatred. Actually, a big part of what I read yesterday was just this one long, drawn-out battle. Actually, I'm trying to remember where I was last time I talked to you. Maybe I've had 2 long, drawn-out battles since then. And even though I think that Joe Abercrombie writes his battle scenes fairly well for battle scenes, I still get bored. I think that's a me problem though, rather than a Joe Abercrombie problem. Although, I mean, he's the one who's deciding to include these long, drawn-out battles. Although, I mean, I can see how it helps him to kind of get across that message of how awful war and killing can be. But it's not always that enjoyable to read. Still, I was very invested in the outcome of the battle, and there's some other things that are going on that I became very invested in the outcome of them, and so I was rushing through those bits to find out what happens. What I will say is, like, I guess I've got about 80 pages left to go, and I really have no idea what's going to happen in those 80 pages. It could kind of go in any direction. But also, there's a couple of romances in this. Like, I think it's probably blasphemy to compare Joe Abercrombie to Sarah J. Maas, but in some ways it felt a little bit like he was trying to pair all the characters up. And even though now we're having some troubles in the romances, like, maybe they just feel like third act breakups, like, is common in romance. I don't read romance, but that's what I hear people talk about all the time. And what's happening with one particular romantic pairing, it's kind of predictable, which isn't what I expect from Joe Abercrombie. So I'm kind of waiting and expecting in these last 80 pages that he'll just, like, say, no, I fooled you, but I guess we'll see. So then as well, Shaman's Crossing, this one, there have been some really satisfying moments. One of them was when our main character's, like, fat friend, he really schools his friends, and they think, you know, that they're being really honorable and defending him, and he's just like, no, you're wrong, and just, like, lays down these facts about being fat that are just, like, it was so satisfyingly done in the way his friends were like, oh, we haven't been as supportive as we thought we were being. It was really nice. There's also a whole big bit where our main character is kind of learning that women are real people, not just, like, beautiful, fancy things to be stuck in a house and create a family. So some of the things his cousin was saying when she's schooling him in this were, again, just really satisfying. Maybe not quite as satisfying as when Gord had his say, but still satisfying. It is still somewhat frustrating, kind of this conflict that's being set up between the old nobles and the new nobles, and I have a feeling that that's kind of going to be the big disaster that happens right at the end of the book. Maybe. I still don't really know where this is going to go either. There has been some more kind of callbacks to the earlier magical stuff that happened, and again, I feel like right at the end of this book everything's going to fall apart, and it's going to be somewhat related to the schooling noble conflict that's going on, but also this magic's got to be playing a part. I will say I cannot help but read Shaman's Crossing and keep comparing the main character to Fitz. Sometimes I think I almost forget that it's not Fitz, because he's very similar in the way that he's always trying to do the right thing, even though he doesn't always know what the right thing is, and sometimes he makes some really terrible decisions, but he's trying. I also really enjoy the way it's pulling in some more environmental themes and kind of bringing that up against, like, humanity's quest for power, or at least, you know, these people who have come on and started colonizing and taking over the place and are causing a bunch of problems. And I'm really interested, I think, to see where that's going to go in the series. But as I said, I'm still, like, I'm 85% of the way through, and I really don't know how it's going to end. So hopefully I can find some time today to finish it off. The other thing I did do is I read the second volume of Locke and Key. I couldn't help myself. I will admit the second book wasn't quite as, like, moorish as the first book, but I still really enjoyed it. There are a lot of bits through this where there's a lot of, like, homophobia and racism and, like, ableism and, like, just really awful things happening. And I think I saw I've forgotten her last name. I'll link it somewhere. I saw her talking about how when you read Locke and Key, you can really tell that JoeHill is Stephen King's son, because it is really similar in the way that they have these bad characters. Normally it's the bad characters saying really awful things, and I think you can look at it in one way as he's using that to help you identify the bad characters. Not that you really need that help, but sometimes it also feels like maybe they're enjoying that kind of language or that kind of behavior a little bit too much, and like using it just to make things feel more gritty, even when it isn't necessary to the story. I guess you could kind of make that claim about Abercrombie to some degree as well, just in the way that he uses violence and other people's pain. But despite that, I am still really enjoying the story, and some of the things, and again, the way the keys are being used are so cool. I have a feeling now that my reread of this series is just gonna like fly by. I'm gonna get through it in no time. Okay, so I finished A Little Hatred and also Shaman's Crossing, and let's talk about Shaman's Crossing first, because it was by far superior. The end turned out to be such an emotional roller coaster. I was actually just sitting on my bed listening to it because I had like an hour left of listening time. I think because I was listening at 2 times speed, it was like 2 hours of the audiobook. And it was just like so intense and engrossing, and I was just so worried about everything that was happening, and it was like up and down, and I really loved it. Like, if I was a mood reader, I would probably jump straight into the audiobook for the next book in the series. I'm kind of glad I'm not, though, because I do know, even though it can be very satisfying to like binge a whole series, also after the fact when I do that, I usually feel like everything's gotten all mushed together in my head and I haven't really enjoyed it as much as I could have if I'd spread it out. So now I get to anticipate reading the next book for like a whole month. That's super exciting. And I have to say, like, this book has a much lower average rating than the Realm of the Elderlings books do on Goodreads. And I don't know why. Like, if you liked the first trilogy, the Assassin's trilogy, Assassin's Apprentice trilogy, or like if you liked Assassin's Apprentice, I don't know why you wouldn't like Soldier Son. It is true it's not quite that standard fantasy setting. Instead, it's like colonial America, and maybe some of the horrible things that happen to Fitz are things that are less likely to be something you'd relate to, whereas the horrible things that are happening to Navarre and the people he knows are more like the fat phobia, the sexism, the bullying. Maybe it's stuff that people are more likely to be triggered by. Oh, I guess like want to just say racism, but like war and colonization is more than that, or at least the extreme of that. So there's definitely some really difficult topics being dealt with, but I really love the way that it's dealing with some of those. I can't really speak to the racism aspect of it, and I would like to see like a Native Americans review of this book. I couldn't find one. If you know of one, or if you're Native American and you've read this book, let me know. But the way that it was dealing with like environmental themes as well, just I can't wait to see what it's going to do with that in the next 2 books. I can't understand. Navarre, the main character, I think I keep forgetting to say his name because I keep kind of just thinking of him as Fitz. But as a main character, he's very similar to Fitz. And yes, it's really slow-paced in some parts, but so are all of the Realm of the Elderlings books. I don't know. I'm really excited about this series. I'm giving that first book 5 stars. Easy. Then we have A Little Hatred. Now, admittedly, I had just finished Shaman's Crossing when I sat down to finish this, so it was a headache for it to follow, but it's like it didn't even try. And I kind of want to say the very ending of this book was more like a romance than anything else, and not a good romance. And the characters just felt very immature, and nothing that they were doing really seemed to matter. Like, there were some oh shit kind of moments, and it's still Joe Abercrombie's writing. There's still some really good lines and some funny lines as well, but I feel like I was most engaged in the middle of the story, and then at the end I was just rolling my eyes a lot. And then I guess right at the very, very end, it kind of set things up for the next 2 books, I guess. I still don't really know what the point is. More of the First of the Magi's meddling, I suspect. But anyway, yeah, I was really hoping that I would love this last trilogy in the First Little World, but at the moment, I'm definitely preferring the first trilogy, and this is fine. Like, this is good. I'll probably give it 4 stars, but was it as good as Shaman's Crossing? No. Is it fair to compare them? Maybe not, but this just didn't do everything that I hoped it would do. Like, it had some of Joe Abercrombie's strengths in it, but there were some other things that I think he's been good at previously, or in some of his previous books, like character development that I don't think this really pulled off. And even though Abercrombie's books are often lacking in plot, still in the previous, or at least in the first trilogy, I felt like we had a direction, even if it was sometimes a bit all over the place and a bit circular. This, I don't really know if I feel like we have a direction. And I'm probably not going to pick up the next book in this trilogy until like another 2 months, because I'm following along with Becca and the Books' book club's schedule, so I don't want to get too far ahead. I've been behind, actually, for the last few books, but I've caught up, and now I'll just follow along, I guess. I really hope the next book in the trilogy will be better. So let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this vlog, because I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments, or let me know if you've been reading anything exciting lately. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.